Hi, my name is JMcGill, and this is my final assignment submission for the Next Generation Cities and Transportation course with Simon Fraser University. It's with respect to Complete Streets Implementation's Challenges, and I've entitled it, If You Build It, They May Not Come. I chose this topic and this option in my submission because I've been a transportation planner and traffic engineer for many years now. And I've learned a lot from this course about the interrelationship about land use planning and transportation planning and engineering. And I really wanted to speak to some of these issues, the interrelationships of these issues. As a former director of transportation for an Ontario municipality and a practicing engineering consulting engineer, I've seen many different perspectives on complete streets and ambitions for them. And I've seen many cases where they're not functioning well, and I just wanted to speak to some of those because it's near and dear to my heart to get the future established properly. I wanted to start out with a bit of a historical perspective because I've been in the industry for so long. I've seen a lot of changes, and starting out with, in the 60s where we had highway expansion, 70s where the fuel efficiency became a priority, in the 80s where safer roads became a priority, and you can see from the chart on the right hand side here that around 1980 that the number of persons killed actually started to reduce significantly. The trend reversed from increasing to a decreasing, and in Canada that's been a great initiative, and it actually spawned a number of road safety audit programs, of which I was part of. In the 90s, traffic calming became a priority, and making people behave a little better. Transit became a priority. In the 2000s, then sustainable transportation was the theme for almost all of the transportation master plans that I saw and was involved with. And now we're talking about complete streets, which I find interesting that we've got to this point. But I'm really looking to think when we start talking about 25 years in the future and forecasting, what's the future really going to hold in our transportation community, having seen what we've seen in the past. So I started out with this historical perspective on the transportation side, but I wanted to marry that a little bit with some of the things I've read in the past about the future. And I looked to David Foote's book from the mid-90s called Boom, Bust, and Echo. And it's really interesting to actually look at what he saw at that time for the Generation X guys, of which, of course, I'm part of, I guess, one of the early members of that. And we had fairly traditional expectations from our lives, and I think if you look at the last bullet point here before I move on, was the idea that in the 2000s we were going to be the first generation that retires early and enjoys a long extended retirement period, which of course has not come to pass because here I am still working with no end in sight, and a lot of my colleagues still working as well. So the Echo generation started to be a little bit different. Their expectations, of life and what they're going to own and where they're going to live. It's changed quite a bit, and they like to move from the suburbs. They were starting to think about living in the city and created the gentrification of the city. But now the millennials, totally different expectations. They're well educated, they're social media savvy, and they really want a balance between work and personal life. Probably for me, some of the commentary that came out of that social value study that Environics did for the Board of Trade in Ontario was the idea that in the 2020s and beyond, there's going to be more cocooning. And I can see that where people are not going to be going out to shop. It's going to be delivered to their home. They're going to have on-demand point-to-point service when they need it. So, that first to last mile issue starts to disappear. Yeah, it really is going to be an interesting time, both on the transportation side and on the social values side as we go into the future. So having set the framework for my talk, I wanted to speak to a couple of case studies that I've been involved with. The first one being the Niagara Region Transportation Master Plan, where I was responsible for overseeing the Complete Streets initiatives. And it was a great initiative, the Transportation Master Plan, and the whole concept of planning for Niagara Region, because it was first it's been the first Transportation Master Plan that the region's undertaken. But they did it, and similar to what we had heard before in one of our early modules, that coordinating transportation with municipal planning is probably a key to success. And they did that in Niagara with the Municipal Comprehensive Review, the Water and Wastewater Master Plan, and the TMP going hand in hand together at the same time. And as we see on the left-hand side, they had an interesting themes of how we grow, how we go, and how we flow, and tying them all together. One of the visions that came out of the whole concepts for these initiatives was revitalizing city centers and addressing climate change. And I found it interesting that they would reference a document called The Fourth Industrial Revolution by Klaus Schwab, that talks about, and I'll quote, "We stand on the brink of a technological revolution that will fundamentally alter the way we live, work, and relate to one another." And that's built into the TMP vision work, which I found very interesting. But the focus for my presentation is going to be on the Complete Streets Initiative, which included three components: the Complete Streets policies, the design guidelines, and the operating policies, which in reality became their implementation plan. So these initiatives really built out of some themes that came from the active transportation community and white papers that they produced, as you see on the right-hand side here. And it sort of said that complete streets were really the way to go when we move forward on a transportation master plan. So part of the TMP, we did a lot of stakeholder meetings and a lot of public engagement initiatives. And what I found very interesting was the most vocal people. Of course, we've seen this for a long time, that cyclists are very active in planning transportation infrastructure. But we actually, in Niagara, got a lot of students and farmers showing up and talking about their needs. Of course, in Niagara, the farm agricultural industry is a significant part of their success story, an economic success story in Niagara. The contrasting vision, which came out, were the developers who actually came to these stakeholder meetings and their vision of what Niagara should look like. So, as typical, we put together a needs and opportunities statement for the transportation, which included choice, transportation choice, economic stimulus, and taking advantage of new technologies. And finally, for the TMP component, they had created a vision for Niagara, which was to create a unique place in Ontario to live, work, invest, and play. So of the three components that we had to talk about, the policies, guidelines, and implementation plan, the policies component started out with suggestion for the official plan policies that would be embraced later on after the reports were finished. And it was to support Niagara's investment in complete streets as the cornerstone to the region's community development, and as a transformative measure, help to establish a new identity for the region as a leader in community design and mobility. So in theory, what they wanted to do was leapfrog a lot of other municipalities. Since this was their first, they weren't tied to anything in the past of their TMP. So they really wanted to embrace what had been done in other municipalities and go beyond that. The policies included the 4 pillars: complete streets, public spaces, accommodating pedestrians and cyclists, and finally, and this is where I think the focus of my concern is, a strong decision-making framework of Of interest as part of the policies as well, they had statements about right-of-way protections, uh, a multimodal level of service tool, which was built on, if you see on the right-hand side, the City of Ottawa's multimodal level of service targets. The one for Niagara was really building on what was done in Ottawa, because our team did these ones as well. And then developing some cost perspectives of what these complete streets initiatives would cost the region down the road. So moving along to the design guidelines, the second component of their Complete Streets initiative, they really wanted to look at what Niagara was all about, and clearly they needed to look at what their streets and right-of-ways could accommodate, but they wanted to look at, make sure that this was a built in Niagara kind of policy or guideline documents. And obviously it's a very diverse community. There's 12 separate municipal governments within the Niagara region, 11 of them being lower tier municipalities, and of course the region being the upper tier municipality. And it's a very diverse geography, including the escarpment running through the center of it, being bordered by land, by water on three sides. It was an interesting geographic challenge here in Niagara. We are unique in Ontario for the tourism. We've got some great tourism, golf centers, ecotourism is a big thing here with the wine industry. And of course, all of that flows from the fact that we have a moderate climate in this south part of Ontario, and the agricultural industry is a big part, plays a big part into that. So we used that as a framework for setting up our topologies, and we came up with these 6, being main streets, urban general, and 2 components of that being the narrow version and a wider version, depending on where you are in the region. Some areas that are transitioning from sort of farmlands, rural centers to something more like villages, hamlets, and of course the fairly extensive part of the region, the road network, is the rural component. So these were the 6 topologies that we came up with, and then in the guideline, of course, there was details for all of these contained within. So finally, a main part that we thought was going to be critical to the success of any of this Complete Streets work was the operating policies, which really were directed at public works, who oversee all the capital projects for the region. And as you can see, then any of the regional capital programs were to include a Complete Streets component. So really what they were doing is saying in this document that Complete Streets need to be a forethought rather than an afterthought to any of the capital programs. So they initiated and they embraced in the policies planning workshops needed to be held early in any capital program, and you can see the life cycle on the right-hand side of any infrastructure project. So basically, right from the beginning of the planning exercise, making sure that Complete Streets was a consideration right off the bat. The region then would take responsibility for the design and construction of any Complete Streets on their regional road network. They made some limitations on what they would accept, including that they did not want any vertical traffic calming measures or pavers on any of the regional roads, which makes sense because of the function of a regional road. But they actually introduced something which was unique in Niagara, especially with 11 lower tier municipalities, is that they would then partner with the lower tier municipalities for Main Streets initiatives. And that's really a new thing for Niagara, and really I think made a lot of the local municipalities embrace this TMP and the Complete Streets initiatives that were built into it, as actually putting some commitment aside to help make it happen in some of these lower tier municipalities. But here's where it started to fall down in my mind. One of the exercises we did was we looked at the 10-year capital program for the region and started to say, how much money should we set aside to ensure that Complete Streets gets done. So we started with the original capital estimate for each of the projects, and there was many classifications. You can see on the left-hand side here that these are capacity improvement programs. There was rehab programs, there was bridge programs. Each of them had a different estimate of how much percentage increase would be necessary to accommodate Complete Streets for that classification of capital program. And what we did is we created a table that was the increase of dollars associated with implementing Complete Streets with each of these. So we took this to council. Of course, council embraced all of these new dollars, and there's a new 10-year capital budget established, including Complete Streets. So that was all great stuff. We did the policies, we did the topologies, and we came up with this implementation guidelines. But I think where I think it fails is here with the decision-making framework, because as you can see, that it was a great concept from plan to design to build and operate. Great concept to include Complete Streets. However, it's failing in its implementation because despite the fact that we've talked about the relationship between land use planning and transportation planning and engineering, transportation engineering, the connection still doesn't exist, and it's not strong. Certainly the planning exercise has been embraced, but from the design and build operate, a lot of the public works staff are still looking at their capital budget saying we need to fix the road and utilities first, and that any dollars that are left are available for streetscaping and other things after the fact, and that's not the way it's supposed to work. And it's really, if it's not functioning, maybe it's time to revisit Complete Streets and look at where is it going in the future, and is it an opportunity now to actually revisit Complete Streets? So that's sort of the end of the first project that I want to highlight. The second one is one that is a little more advanced, if you will, because about 10 years ago, the city of Niagara Falls really embraced the idea of fixing up and revitalizing their downtown, which is a different area than the tourist area, of course. And of course, it's a real challenge taking away people, visitors from the Niagara Falls tourist area and historic Niagara on the Lake, which are great tourist attractions. But the downtown core, which is centered on Queen Street, has really deteriorated, and they really are looking to improve it. And it is the home of their city hall. So for the locals, they're hoping to really revitalize it. And I wanted to speak to it because I'm really impressed with what they did in terms of a Complete Streets initiative for Queen Street. And they've built all of these things, and they're in place now, and it's beautiful. You can see from some of the images that a lot of investment in Complete Streets initiatives to make this street function better, be more attractive for the locals to come. They've themed it as the Q from Queen Street, flows right through everything, right through to the garbage bins, the arches that go over the street. You can see on the bench that's below, it's on the benches, it's everywhere, and it's really they've really done a beautiful job making it easy to maintain. The flower baskets are in the summertime, can be changed if there's any problems with any of the flowers. So it's not like there's an underground watering system that's necessary, or any of the LID initiatives that they have to worry about. In the wintertime, of course, there is a bit of a problem in the sense that they have to almost hand shovel some of the snow out between some of these streetscaping components. But all in all, it's a great initiative, and the problem is nobody's coming to downtown. Despite all of their other initiatives, which are, example, they've created financial incentives for the local businesses and industries to invest in the downtown. They hold street festivals to make people aware of what's downtown. They even had an initiative to try and bring a post-secondary campus to the area to try and make sure that there's a younger generation and a reason for people to come, because right now there really is no anchor of any sort to bring people there. There is a train station. You can see on the graph on the left-hand side, the train station is identified there, and it is got summertime commuter traffic or tourist traffic trains coming from Toronto that work pretty well. And right now there is an initiative to try and bring Go commuter rail on a regular basis to the downtown of Niagara Falls. And they are looking at designing a mobility hub around that station. So hopefully some of these things will really help investment. And if you look at some of these images from the past, it really was a gathering place at one time for the residents. And you can see why the city wants to revitalize the street, because it has had a history of being the centerpiece for the city locals. But now it's fairly desolate. It's not that inviting, and not because of what they've done for the Complete Streets initiatives, but because there's no real anchors there. A lot of the stores are closed down. There's a lot of vacancies in there, and there really isn't anything to bring people downtown to this area. So that was sort of the foundation of what I wanted to talk about. Is again, if they in Niagara, if they put the policies in place, it doesn't necessarily guarantee that something's going to happen for Complete Streets. And same thing with Queen Street, where they actually built the infrastructure and things are still not happening there. So maybe we should be stopping and saying, maybe Complete Streets is now the new business as usual, and maybe the next generation, it's an opportunity here in Niagara to take a look at what the next generation initiatives should look like. And I sort of have been party to a number of presentations, as a lot of people have, about the future. And I looked at Cavco and some of the papers that they've put together and some of the presentations, and they're sort of a leading agency, I guess, in Canada for automotive technologies. And what really bothers me as a transportation planner is the socioeconomic future will not be an extrapolation of the past, which is really what we try and do in transportation planning. We look at the past. Disruptive technologies mean that forecasting the future using rearview mirror is not accurate. Again, a concern for me as a transportation planner. And historical data, such as passenger volumes, the number of vehicles on the road, etc., may no longer be useful. That's really concerning for me as a planner, because I'm looking at transportation master plans for 2041 and capital programs that go to 2031, and I really don't know what I should be telling my clients where they should be spending their money and what they should be spending their money on in the next 10-year period, because if we just use the past, the future could look different. And there's been a lot of initiatives in Ontario to start looking at what this is going to look like in the future. Province has initiated its Autonomous Vehicle Innovation Network. The City of Toronto has some citywide autonomous vehicles working groups going. A shuttle service in waterfront area is being, for autonomous vehicles, is being targeted for operation this summer. And quite frankly, it goes just beyond passenger vehicles. Probably autonomous trucks and buses are ahead of even the passenger vehicle versions. We're starting to see sidewalk delivery robots, drone delivery systems, and on the maintenance side, automated snowplows and flying, and for personal transportation choice, flying taxis. So the future could be quite different than what it has been in the past. And so, I've seen in some of the commentary that in this course that there are many differing opinions, and I know I've been directed to look at some of those differing opinions about when and what the future holds for transportation planning, and I've looked at those, and we know that technology is advancing quicker than regulations and legislations. We know that it's going to be difficult for the public, especially my generation, to accept the new transportation choices, but it's going to be difficult to say because, in many ways, a lot of the older generation now are going to be on the road when now, if they have to go and travel, it could be very difficult for them. Now, if they have a door-to-door, on-demand, and autonomous driving vehicles, they could be much more active in the community. Or, as we talked earlier, they could be cocooning themselves, so hopefully not. But what we're really coming to see is that we're moving from a transportation or a passenger vehicle planning program when I started in this industry to a more human-centered planning that really not only takes advantage of technologies, but also makes the right-of-way to be considered more of a public space and for a useful place for everybody to come and congregate and enjoy. So again, the basic challenges of the future are, for me, the basic assumptions for street design, traffic operations, and engineering are really in question and really tough for me to really understand what I should be telling my clients. So in summary, the Niagara Region case study, the Niagara Region wanted to leapfrog other municipalities with their first TMP. They did a great job in concept marrying planning, land use planning with engineering, transportation, and utilities servicing engineering work. They created a vision that not everybody, all the stakeholders bought into, but certainly tried to define it for Niagara Region as a unique place in Ontario. They really wanted complete streets to be the centerpiece of their transportation master plan. They enhanced their capital budgets to accommodate complete streets, but it fails at the implementation stage where complete streets is still an afterthought rather than a forethought. And the question becomes now, will they actually build what we've talked about here with all of the investments and planning that they've done for complete streets? And if they don't, maybe it's time for them to revisit the complete streets and completely revolutionize the street for people and take advantage of the technology advances if they're really not in the program of implementing their complete streets policies. So the other case study was the Queen Street one, where they actually built it, hoped that it would come. It was a great plan, and it's a great complete streets implementation, but nobody's coming there. You could shoot a cannon down that street on any given day. And in fact, I work, my offices are on that street, and trying to find a place to even have a lunch on that street is really difficult because restaurants keep coming and going and folding. So they really need some better community planning. And to be fair, they're trying. But I think they really could learn a lesson from the Surrey example, which I was really impressed with some of the messages that we were presented in one of our week modules about retrofitting, incentivize, creating a civic heart, public space, and breaking up the super block. I really think there's key lessons in there. So that's my submission. That's my final assignment, and I just really wanted to speak about those two initiatives that I've been involved with in my backyard, and I really wanted to just say thank you for the course. It's been a wonderful experience. I took it to learn a few things and open my eyes about where the rest of the industry is at, and it's been great. And I really appreciate it and look forward to future courses. So thank you very much.